for words from a 7-year-old boy stopped The Tonight Show cold. But it wasn't the words themselves that shattered Johnny Carson's legendary composure. It was the silence that followed. The way Muhammad Ali's hands trembled as he held a father's final letter, and the secret this child had been carrying alone for months. When those 4 words escaped little Tommy's lips, Johnny dropped his cards. Ali covered his face, and 300 audience members witnessed something that transcended television entirely. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer entertainment. This was raw humanity unfolding in real time, and nobody in that studio was prepared for what came next. Let me take you back to how this impossible moment began. Because what happened in the 20 minutes before those 4 words changed everything you thought you knew about courage, loss, and what it means to find family in the most unexpected places. It was a Thursday evening in November 1975 at NBC's Rockefeller Center. Johnny Carson was preparing for what should have been a routine episode of The Tonight Show. Muhammad Ali was scheduled to promote his upcoming fight against Joe Frazier, their rubber match that the boxing world was calling the Thriller in Manila. The conversation was supposed to be light, entertaining, the kind of easy chemistry between Johnny's wit and Ali's charisma that made late-night television feel effortless. But Tommy Richardson wasn't supposed to be there at all. The 7-year-old had arrived with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, part of a backstage tour that typically happened hours before filming. Tommy was small for his age, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed too wise for someone who should still be losing baby teeth. He wore his best button-down shirt carefully pressed by the nurses at Saturday Jude Children's Research Hospital and carried a worn notebook that he clutched against his chest like armor. The original plan was simple. A quick meet and greet, some photos, maybe a handshake with Johnny before Tommy returned to his treatment. But as the backstage coordinator was leading Tommy toward the exit, something unprecedented happened. Muhammad Ali stepped out of his dressing room at the exact moment Tommy was walking past. "Well, well, well. What do we have here?" Ali said with that magnetic smile that had charmed millions. "You look like a fighter to me, little man. You got that champion look in your eyes." Tommy stopped walking. He looked up at Ali with an expression that caught everyone off guard. Not starstruck excitement, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Or perhaps the look of someone who had been waiting for this moment without even knowing it. "You're Muhammad Ali," Tommy said softly. "You're the greatest." Ali chuckled, kneeling down to Tommy's level with a natural grace that made everything look like poetry in motion. "That's right, little man. But I bet you're pretty great yourself. What's your name?" "Tommy Richardson." The boy's grip on his notebook tightened. "My dad said you were the bravest man in the whole world. He said you taught him that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right even when everybody tells you you're wrong." The hallway suddenly felt quieter. Something in Tommy's voice, the past tense, the way his small shoulders carried a weight too heavy for his frame, made everyone listening lean in closer. "Your daddy sounds like a wise man," Ali said, his voice taking on that gentle tone he reserved for children and moments that mattered. "What else did your daddy tell you?" Tommy's eyes filled with tears. He was trying desperately to hold back. "He said, if I ever met you, I should give you something. He said, you'd understand better than anybody." Ali glanced up at the Make-A-Wish coordinator, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Behind her gentle smile was a story that didn't need words. But this was the moment no one in that hallway expected. Tommy opened his notebook and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn from being handled countless times. The edges were soft like fabric. "He wrote you a letter," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before he got too sick to write anymore, he made me promise to give it to you if I ever met you. He said you'd know what to do with his words." Ali's hand stilled. In his career, he'd received thousands of fan letters. But something about this felt different, sacred somehow. The way this child held the paper like it contained something more precious than gold. "Would you like me to read it, little man?" Ali asked gently. Tommy nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. He said, "If I was brave enough to give it to you, maybe you'd read it out loud. He said you have a good voice for important things." The backstage coordinator was already reaching for her phone, probably to call someone about keeping the schedule on track. But Ali was no longer thinking about call times or fight promotions. He was looking at a little boy who had traveled hundreds of miles to fulfill a promise to his dying father. That's when Johnny Carson rounded the corner looking for Ali to go over some last-minute interview notes. But when Johnny saw them, Muhammad Ali, kneeling in an NBC hallway, holding a letter, talking quietly with a small boy who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, everything changed. "Everything okay over here?" Johnny asked, his comedian's instincts automatically scanning the energy in the room. Ali looked up with tears already forming in his eyes. "Johnny, I'd like you to meet Tommy Richardson. He has something very important to share, and I think our audience tonight needs to hear it." Johnny looked at Tommy, then at the letter in Ali's hands, then back to Tommy's face. Whatever was happening here was bigger than television. And Johnny Carson had been in the business long enough to recognize when life was offering something more valuable than entertainment. "Tommy," Johnny said, crouching down beside Ali, "would you like to be on The Tonight Show?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Is that okay? I don't have any jokes or magic tricks or anything." Johnny's heart clenched. "Son, sometimes the most important things we share aren't jokes at all." 15 minutes later, Tommy Richardson was sitting between Johnny Carson and Muhammad Ali on The Tonight Show stage, his notebook in his lap, his father's letter in Ali's hands. The audience had been told they were about to witness something special, but nobody could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Johnny began, his usual smooth confidence replaced by something softer, more reverent. "Tonight we have a very special guest. This is Tommy Richardson, and he's here to share something that his father wrote for Muhammad." The audience applauded, but it was different from their usual enthusiasm. These were people who could sense they were about to be part of something significant. Ali looked at Tommy, who nodded solemnly. "Should I read this out loud just like your daddy wanted?" "Yes, sir. He practiced reading it to me lots of times before he got too tired." Ali unfolded the letter carefully. It was written in the slightly shaky handwriting of someone battling illness, but every word was clearly formed as if each one had been chosen with infinite care. "Dear Muhammad Ali," Ali began reading, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent studio. "My name is David Richardson, and I am writing this letter while my son Tommy sleeps in the hospital bed next to mine." The studio fell completely silent. This wasn't what anyone had expected. "We have been watching your fights together during my cancer treatments. Tommy's favorite is when you fought Sonny Lon because he says it's about believing in something nobody else can see coming. He asked me every day if I believe that impossible things can happen. And I tell him yes because he is mine." Johnny's eyes were already beginning to glisten. The audience was leaning forward, sensing they were witnessing something profound. "By the time you read this, I will probably be gone. But Tommy will still be fighting because he is braver than his old man ever was. He has leukemia, Mr. Ali. The doctors give him good odds, but good odds feel different when it's your 7-year-old son." Ali paused, looking at Tommy, who was sitting perfectly still, his small hands folded in his lap. The little boy's lips were moving silently, and Ali realized he was saying the words along with him. He had memorized his father's letter. "I am writing this because Tommy told me that if he ever met you, he would ask you how you stayed brave when the whole world was against you. When they took away your title, when they said you were a traitor, when they tried to make you fight a war you didn't believe in. How did you keep going?" The audience was completely still. Even the cameramen seemed to be holding their breath. "And I want you to know the answer I gave him. I told him that you stayed brave the same way he stays brave. One day at a time, one round at a time, one moment of choosing what's right over what's easy." Ali's voice began to waver, but he continued reading. "I am asking you to tell Tommy something for me. Tell him that his daddy believes in him. Tell him that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what you need to do even when you are afraid. Tell him that every day he chooses to keep fighting, he's proving that impossible things really can happen." Tears were now openly flowing down Ali's face, but his voice remained strong and clear. "Tell him that he is my greatest victory, my heavyweight championship of the heart. And tell him that love doesn't end just because the fight does. Please tell him that his daddy will be watching from the best seat in the house forever." Allie's voice broke completely on the final lines. Float like a butterfly. Sting like a bee. My beautiful boy. Your daddy loves you to the moon and back. With all my love, David Richardson. The silence that followed was absolute. Ally carefully refolded the letter, his hands shaking. Johnny had tears streaming down his face, no longer caring about television or entertainment or anything except the little boy sitting between them. But then Tommy spoke. For words that shattered every heart in that studio. He kept his promise. Johnny looked at Tommy through his tears. What promise, buddy? Tommy's voice was small but clear, carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned about love and lost too early. He promised he would find a way to tell me he was proud of me even after he went to heaven. And he did. He gave you his words to say. That's when Muhammad Ali did something that would be remembered for generations. The man who had faced down Sonny Lawn, who had stood up to the United States government, who had never backed down from any challenge, gently lifted Tommy Richardson out of his chair and held him like the precious gift he was. Little man, Ally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Your daddy was right about everything. You are brave, braver than any fighter I've ever known. And I want to tell you something. Ally looked directly into Tommy's eyes, speaking with the intensity that had made him legendary. Champions aren't made in the ring, Tommy. Champions are made in moments like this. When you choose love over fear. When you keep fighting even when it hurts. When you carry your daddy's words in your heart and share them with the world. The audience was on their feet, but they weren't applauding. They were standing in reverence for something sacred happening before their eyes. And I want to make you a promise, Ally continued. Every time I step in that ring, every time I face an opponent, I'm going to remember what your daddy taught me tonight. That the real fight isn't against the man across from you. It's against giving up. It's against forgetting that love is stronger than anything else in this world. Tommy looked up at Ally with those wise old eyes. Will you teach me how to float like a butterfly? Ally laughed through his tears, the sound filling the studio with joy. Little man, I think you already know how. You've been floating above this whole thing, haven't you? Rising above the fear, above the sadness, carrying your daddy's love everywhere you go. But this was the moment that nobody in the studio and nobody watching at home ever saw coming. Tommy reached into his notebook and pulled out another piece of paper. This one smaller, folded even more carefully than the first. He wrote something for you too, Mr. Johnny. Tommy said he watched your show every night in the hospital. He said you made him laugh even when everything hurt. Johnny took the note with trembling hands. This one was shorter, written in the same careful handwriting. Dear Johnny, Johnny read aloud, his voice breaking. Thank you for helping my son remember how to smile. When you read this, please tell him a joke. He needs to laugh. He needs to remember that joy is still possible even when it feels impossible. That's what dads are for. Thank you for being there when I couldn't be. Johnny looked at Tommy, then at the audience, then back to Tommy. For the first time in his legendary career, he had no idea what to say. How do you tell a joke when your heart is breaking? But then Tommy solved the problem for him. Mr. Johnny, Tommy said with a small smile. Want to hear the joke my dad used to tell me when I was scared? Johnny nodded, not trusting his voice. Why don't skeletons fight each other? Johnny waited. Because they don't have the guts. It was the oldest, corniest joke in the book. And it was perfect. Johnny laughed. Not his practiced television laugh, but a real deep, genuine laugh that came from somewhere beyond performance. Ally laughed too. His joy infectious and beautiful. The audience laughed and Tommy grinned. The biggest grin anyone had seen from him all evening. Your daddy had great taste in jokes, Johnny said, ruffling Tommy's hair. He had great taste in everything, Tommy replied. He picked the best mom, the best doctors, and the best TV shows to watch when we were stuck in the hospital. That's when Ally made a decision that would change Tommy's life forever. Tommy, Ally said, his voice carrying that characteristic rhythm that made everything sound like poetry. Do you know what I do when I'm training for a big fight? Tommy shook his head. I surround myself with champions. People who make me better just by being around them. People who remind me what real strength looks like. Ally paused, looking at Johnny, who nodded immediately. How would you feel about being part of my training camp? Not for boxing, for life. How would you feel about coming to visit us whenever you need to remember that your daddy's love is still here with you? Tommy's eyes went wide. Really? But I don't know anything about boxing. Little man, Ally said with that famous smile. You just taught the heavyweight champion of the world something about fighting. You taught me that the strongest punch isn't the one that knocks your opponent down. It's the one that lifts somebody else up. Johnny leaned forward. And how would you feel about being our official consultant on jokes? Because that one you just told was way better than anything I had planned for tonight. For the first time since walking onto that stage, Tommy looked like what he was, a 7-year-old boy who had just been offered something wonderful. Can I bring my notebook? I have more of Dad's letters in here. You can bring whatever you want, buddy. Ally said. This is your place now, too. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone understood that what they were witnessing had nothing to do with television and everything to do with what it means to be human. 3 people, a talk show host, a boxer, and a little boy fighting the hardest battle of his life, had found each other in the most unlikely place and created something beautiful. 6 months later, Tommy's cancer went into remission. The doctors credited his positive attitude and strong support system. Tommy credited his dad's promises and his new family at NBC. Johnny Carson still kept David Richardson's letter in his desk drawer. On difficult days when the entertainment industry felt shallow or meaningless, he would read it and remember what television could be at its very best. A bridge between hearts, a reminder that we're all just walking each other home. Muhammad Ali visited Tommy in Memphis every few months. They would go to baseball games and talk about floating like butterflies in life, not just in the ring. Ally taught Tommy how to throw a jab. Tommy taught Ally that courage looks different when it's 7 years old and fighting for its life. But the most important lesson came from David Richardson, a man who never got to meet his heroes, but who understood something profound about love and legacy. That the most powerful promises are the ones we keep even after we're gone. And that sometimes the best way to say goodbye is to make sure your love finds new ways to show up in the world. The notebook Tommy carried that night now sits in a place of honor in Johnny's office. It's filled with letters his father wrote not just to Tommy, but to doctors, to nurses, to the cleaning lady who always remembered to ask about Tommy's favorite cartoon. Each letter was a seed planted in the hope that kindness would grow in places David would never see. Those seeds are still growing. Every time Johnny tells a joke with a little more heart. Every time Ally steps into a ring, remembering that real strength is about lifting others up. Every time Tommy Richardson, now cancer-free and in his teens, shares his story with other kids facing their own impossible battles. David's love continues to find new ways to show up in the world. That night, in the bright lights of a television studio, 3 very different people learned that sometimes the most important victories happen when we choose to see the person behind the pain. When we respond to fear with love, and when we remember that every human heart deserves to be held with reverence. Muhammad Ali once said he was the greatest. But that night, he learned from a 7-year-old boy that the greatest victories aren't about defeating opponents. They're about keeping promises that echo across time, building bridges with strangers who become family, and proving that love doesn't end just because the fight does. He kept his promise, Tommy had said. And in that moment, everyone in that studio understood that they were witnessing the truest definition of greatness. Not the kind that gets measured in wins and losses, but the kind that gets measured in how many hearts you touch along the way. The Field of Dreams was never really about baseball. It was about building something beautiful enough that love could find its way home. Even in the bright lights of a television studio, even in the space between goodbye and hello, even in the 4 simple words of a little boy who knew his father had kept every promise that ever mattered. Because sometimes the greatest champions aren't the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who help others get back up. And sometimes the most important fights aren't won with fists. They're won with open hearts, gentle words, and the courage to see that every person we meet is fighting battles we know nothing about. That Thursday night in November 1975, Tommy Richardson taught Muhammad Ali and Johnny Carson something they would carry for the rest of their lives. That true greatness isn't about being seen. It's about making sure others know they are seen, valued, and loved beyond measure. Please like and subscribe and press the notification button. Thanks.